Good afternoon, everybody, and good day to the Navajo Nation and to all of the listeners out there. I want to thank you again for joining us, and I'm really, really glad that you guys are all very much interested in these Navajo Nation Council delegates. And the whole idea behind it seems to be generating a lot of interest because no matter where we are on the Navajo Nation, collectively across the board, the Navajo Nation 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, and so forth, they're going to be representing us. So if we can begin to engage all of us across on the Navajo Nation and also across the globe, I think the idea is going to be a positive and is going to have some results because the council delegates that we're interviewing, as well as the presidents, they're all going to have to work with each other. And not only are they going to work with each other, they're going to be representing you and me. Of course, we expect them to take care of their chapters. And so I am very grateful. So please pass this information on to other people. We're growing. I've got an interview right after this. I've got another interview tomorrow night, and the next night, and the next night, and the next night, all the way till Sunday. So, for those people that are not calling in, please let them know because they're missing out on an opportunity. Because this is going to be a movement. Because the Navajo Nation government, the Navajo people, we want to have a voice, to be a part of the process, not to be a sidebar, not to be an afterthought. Thank you very much. You listen to Politics on the Navajo Nation podcast, and I'm your host, Cal NEZ. Na kaiden ada se chedo but aneda shenale sa etlans te holiero to se todo to se ko ege ara go itchike a ko sha shin hollo aro se so kedo shenale hollo a hut o ite nen shiro. I was a business owner of 40 years, and as well as I was a presidential candidate in 2014. So a lot of the information is collective from that information. And tonight, you guys are like blowing up the whole view out there. Thank you again. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm really excited about this interview. And I have with us Dr. Andy NEZ. And he is here, and I really appreciate it because I know that the incumbents are very difficult to get in touch with, and they're still busy. You know, it's not like they're wrapping things up and they're just going to go right into campaign. So they've got several duties that they're still doing. But anyway, so I'd like to introduce Dr. Andy NEZ.
Yate asen do bikit o ya be ika yate ade do kdo shiche cal aro ade the isn't agi she as dot kdo kwaiki tani honasi e kdo yat any hidini dole shikado ek oge enishle aro torchini e basis chin dot hachini e dashe aro kashe e dashnale aro at sahotso do e na konstrugot li yasit khata hojene ade chike do ade este akodo shamato shamasani yesh makha e kwa akishi yata ha je go e sahotso do a chigo sajin do e dahalge e ade je yen do shnalaka a asaye ade ndakri ako disti de debase badas angara traseta dina shlatani kliniki ako tratna zliniki bi raki belnash e sahotso ne etje tronelt eledo bag edalche e hot ashenanish aro health education human services committee asto e ajo trasada ako di na khabi ikha e kwa ekin hinanish a day on shisizno e shilinjon shilyat e do shilile what benish anigit akodon hitne saho what bekan nashwo ako or ashi what for now as my introduction. Good evening, everyone. I am Andy NEZ. I currently sit on the 25th Navajo Nation Council, and I also appointed to the Health, Education, and Human Services Committee, and I work alongside our wonderful communities of Fort Defiance, Sawmill, Crystal, and Red Lake.
Again, and you're listening. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Can you still hear me?
Oh,
you can still hear me, right? Okay, good. So, you this is going to be your second term, right? If you get reelected. So, for I don't know if you're going to continue your platform, but can you share with us what your current platform is?
Akoshi. So the platform ngi joy kwaiki kada did what ashinash ish on those a kwaiki nas di nana di no a kwaiki na khemiki nanish na that di no. So our team is prepared. We're ready to commence our tasks beforehand. And there's a lot of areas, you know, when I started this position, I had a lot of focus on education. I had a lot of focus on equity. I had a lot of focus on NEZ. We have this term called community. It's a wordplay on community using the Navajo kinship term of ke. But it's really longer, you know, it's more comprehensive than just our relationship with one another. Hona Don Lake Hona Ada Jo such a Liniki dog So in my pursuit of this 25th current Navajo Nation Council, I focused a lot on those areas, and I was able to maximize some of those efforts under this term. And moving forward, there are some areas that we were able to grow, and we want to be able to extend beyond a lot of the work that we've accomplished this term. And so the first one, recycling initiatives. For myself, it's important, you know, for us to consider recycling efforts. I know through this term we've entertained certain initiatives, cleanup efforts. Jo Hikeya adat a jo a shisizano a what bansis case hala a but ado kodo di nihinan set ni ze dat egido na klonshida a dat ejo a ajo f dot cho de ako ni hisizano a hit kwaeki anihiran has aniki ero da nanishta ajda has anikita hit shidi kodo from papers to plastic to oil to metal. And it's important for myself to consider that moving forward, and it's something that I want to be able to capitalize on. And the next item is villages. I'm trying to coin a better term, but housing for myself. It's very important to bring people home, and to me, that's what defines an opportunity to start to think about the economic growth of our communities. Because if you have the more the merrier, basically, then the more opportunities, the more resources and services that they will need. Ako halait kwaeki nikikea kwaeki ahas angi kodo la hawande do nesto erota. It goes back to certain subdivisions. It goes back to certain processes that allow for families to come home and to be home. And so for myself, it's about creating these villages. I'm calling them villages because I want these spaces to be for opportunities for our seniors to have recovery, for our substance and alcohol abuse to have relatives to get recovery, to get their continuum of care, to have our veterans and our disabled relatives space, kind of like a small community where they're able to thrive. And when we passed the legislation, some of you probably know the term 521 or triple R. So there's a $293 million line item veto that was done. A peso o kwaeki o hundi kwaeki sinildo jo a do ho pacha daliada. Ya it was for us to receive delegate region funds, and that was up to about 14 million. And the immediate thing that came to my mind was to establish this community, because I know it's important for our disabled relatives, it's important for our seniors and our veterans and our vulnerable relatives who need space to be able to receive additional care and resources. And then the next item is urban development. I believe that the Navajo Nation is in a position to expand to Albuquerque, Aron Lejos, de Phoenix, Don Salt Lake, and all these other urban spaces. I did entertain this early on. I explored some of the taxation. I've explored some of the land acquisition fund that the Navajo Nation has established, and being able to maximize the Navajo Nation as embassy-like venues in Phoenix or in Albuquerque. And it's going to be, my vision is like, how can we create spaces where we have an opportunity to grow businesses, where we have the net college that expands, where we have businesses and resources expand in urban spaces, because they have the people as well. They have millions of people. And so when I go out to do business in Phoenix or in Albuquerque or Santa Fe, I'm in reinvesting back into my community rather than staying, at a motel or, spending money at a conference when we could have these embassy-like venues within these urban spaces. The next is to amend Title 10. It's something that I'm currently have been working on and have been presenting on. Title 10 is the Navajo Nation's Education Code. It was enacted in 2005. Ako ita do kuje na dina hedon which hut art and hut akonde nihe haalchinen da altrao. Do ultra gido big days ingi yekita days ingi a altoja hit ashi jono nasa do yesto nasan de be betzi the do leto and jono a hit do us. Because in my mind, as a former classroom teacher, education, the landscape, the demographics, in my experience and in my opinion, changes about every 4 to 5 years. And so when you go back 20 years, education has changed tremendously since the enactment of that. And the last thing I'll share is the protecting our natural resources, and it's something that's very important because again we thrive on community, and it's something that I'm very interested in. Should I be reelected? I'm leaning more towards wanting to be a part of the Resource and Development Committee, because I think it's very important to ensure that our land is protected. And laid kinalke dan to Washington dan a hit ashin yan sita ke shisizano de yashtiela. Halate akodo nike and linigido nikinan losh nan set that egit that edo ze that eight a. How do we do our best to preserve it, protect it? Ha de dashi a heshi da de kasan halon de do ito hit ashin. They're going to come in and find interest in our community and our resources, and I think it's very important that we do our best to protect it and preserve it for our future generations. And on top of that, just a lot of individual community-based project and events is what we want to continue to do.
Gushila Che, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Let me just kind of do a real quick recap. Your platform is about recycling. The second thing is villages/housing. You also want to address urban development, land acquisition off reservation. You want to amend Title 10, and then to also to address natural resources. My assumption is that these would cover not only your chapter, but it covers the entire Navajo Nation. And your preference standing committee next go round, should you be reelected, is RDC. Ashwata?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. As we begin to dive a little deeper into what these podcasts are about is trying to explore how that you as a candidate or an incumbent in this case, that please keep in mind that the following questions are, again, we expect you to know what your chapter needs are. And I'm sure now that you're the incumbent, you have that relationship going on. And our assumption here is that all council delegates, and this is the thing that I'm beginning to see, and that is that because of the Navajo Nation being the biggest employer, a lot of all the way to the president, to council, to every tribal employee out there, this is a job. And I don't know how you view it. But technically, from our perspective, the Navajo people, we want public servants. And so based on that, these questions are going to be, once again, as you well discovered, that once you get to Window Rock, you have a greater responsibility. You're a member of NABI, you're a member of your standing committee, and I'm sure you sit on several boards, and it's for the Navajo people. It's not exclusively just for your chapter, but of course you work with the chapter as well. And so that's our assumption. Akoho, looking back, you outlined this platform. Now, can you share with us what your accomplishments have been as a council delegate in the 25th Navajo Nation Council?
Mm-hmm. Akoshim. So I'll start kind of just briefly with my chapters, and I'll start as a region. And by region, I mean, I refer to our 4 chapters as Upper District 18. We do comprise, District 18 includes St. Michael's all the way down towards Hawk. But I just say upper because we're up north and from the rest of our southern neighbors. So, and then I'll go into Navajo Nation-wide. But the first and foremost thing that I want to share regarding each of our chapters is just we were able to, so my belief when it comes to projects is capitalizing on any and all opportunity. It's a term that I typically tell myself. So when we go before any agents, any entities or other potential opportunities, we start to gravitate. As a council delegate, early on for myself, we scored a grant from the abandoned mines for our Fort Defiance community. And what that grant is going to do was, it's a $3 million grant that we submitted, and we were able to receive funding from that in the amount of $3 million, and that's for 72 new solar streetlights. For Fort Defiance, we were also able to do an Adopt a Street initiative, where my belief again is that we have to meet folks halfway. Do e asati kwaiki ishtida do e hajo shi nashi to nde ako het akodo sato ni ka doche. Hala Ayan Halchin Ad and Alta Wandera Unified School District, Aro Kodo Keda Hot Iniki Alto and Lay Inek Shade Dabagan Alto, Aro into Age and De Alto, we pay our water and light bill. So you get services from us as consumers. Ako, where do we meet ourselves halfway to be able to support these initiatives? Ako, that's where the Adopt a Street initiative came into place. We're also moving along through a recovery detox center as well to assist our vulnerable relatives who need the additional guidance and support when it comes to their substance or alcohol abuse. And when they go into foreign spaces, it's very unfortunate, and these circumstances come up, and we want to be able to gravitate and ground that here in our communities. And just about 3 weeks ago, we also scored a $1.7 million transportation infrastructure fund to bring more access to water to the Defiance Plateaus. And it'll help restore water wells in Red Lake as well as Sawmill. Aro and Lay Sawmill, we scored, we have a $3 million allocation for an intergenerational learning center. Jo e kodo n'chalchin ade Head Start de hindalka, ako has tweeted sani a 2019 yen da del card a argent echihid bininagi a kindojo and salito the floor, the tiles a art, you know, it's not, it's condemned. And so what we propose, and with the community support, to do a Sawmill Intergenerational Learning Center. And about 2 months ago, I did receive a call from Senator Kelly's office, Senator Gallego's office. Those are our two U.S. senators for the state of Arizona. And we submitted a congressional directed spending request, and they selected our project to move forward in committee. So we're very hopeful on that. That's for Sawmill, but for Fort Defiance too, they've also done an N9073 Blue Canyon Road, and they've accepted that grant support as well. And so that's another highlight, you know, the Blue Canyon Road. It's still a dirt road. You know, for, you know, 50, 60 and more years, it's been in this state. And so back on May 21st, you know, through the NDOT's partnership, we were able to drop an RFP. So we're hoping to have a contractor in August. And so for the first time ever, we're able to push in and pave the road there for about 6.6 miles. And so on towards Crystal, we've done efforts to obtain a grant as well to help with farming equipment, to do classes. Last year, we also got a $519,000 award from New Mexico U.S. Senator Lujan's office as well for the N321, another 7.7 mile route that is not changed, not paved. Auto recreation as well. So Crystal is a very high senior population. La hot akoro ni has tweedo sani ade keda hot edo e kodo bananishidi ato the daspa ako e aj e la hot ade keda hot akoko ni kodos as a team, we help propose, again, any and all opportunity. What I've learned about was a recreational fund, planning fund from New Mexico DOT. And we were able to score that over the course of 3 months of meeting with the Northwest New Mexico Council on Governance. And they're actually out there now. And it's going to be from the old Crystal chapter to the new Crystal chapter along New Mexico State Highway 134. We also successfully submitted another transportation fund program grant for solar streetlights in our community. We're working with NMDOT as well to install cameras so that on top of Narbona, so that folks, you know, don't have to take any chances when it's snowing. Through the fog, through the snow, the rainstorms, so they can check these cameras. And then with Red Lake as well, we've actually adopted 3 streets. And these adopted streets are, you know, it was to help push for federal grant access. It was to adopt them within the Federal Highways Program. And we also, again, through our work with our U.S. congressional partners, we scored $1 million for our new Red Lake chapter complex for from Congresswoman Teresa Ledger Fernandez's office. And just a whole lot of different things on a Navajo Nation-wide scale. 2 things that I really want to highlight first and foremost is I help sponsor a 2% remediation fund, and it's called the Navajo Nation Environmental Remediation Fund. Peso, Hashine Lao Kwagi, and the joy revenues, the royalties, and all that stuff that come into the nation. AA 2%, AA Kodo, it's for our land to help replenish commercial sites from Navajo Nation. And the thing that led this was from our community of Navajo, the first Navajo Nation Tribal Enterprise, Navajo Forest Products Industry, NFPI, Joe Kwagi Ade, Kadan Kati Nahe with Aj Anajnish Hello in the 1994 that Shina Ita A that they cause A Beninakudo for the spotted owl. And that did help preserve and revive our community and keep it thriving, but it's a $500 million, $500 million to clean up. But I understand across the Navajo Nation there's similar sites, and that's what this legislation did. The other thing that I was able to accomplish with the help of our veterans and with the help of other agents was to formally and officially adopt chapter and agency veteran organizations in Title II, which has never been done before. Halate akodon hit nepa has ani haiki de don hit nihides da do haiki do ein hat bekata. Jashi e kodo di kin katnas ninte ad has angit e betlendelish aro di quat dot e din kato le do that egito e ade dano when I attend these agency and veterans meetings. And so we were able to accomplish that. It did take about a good year of advocacy and meetings and such, but we were able to pass that as well. And then being able, I'm very proud that I was able to introduce 72 legislations so far. My goal is to get over 80. I do have a lot in queue, so we'll see if Legislative Council completes them by the end of this year. But there's so much to report on, just reflecting back on my position here and being able to do the best that we can for our communities. Yeah.
Wow. You said you weren't completely done. I tell you what, I mean, that's very impressive in terms of what you've done. I wish you were, doing in my neck of the woods in Sanasti. So I'm looking at all your, things that you have done from your chapter and what you've done for the Navajo Nation. Of course, all of us have viewed you on the council floor. I have never heard a negative comment, and I think the majority of the people, really appreciate the fact that you've had a very strong presence on the Navajo Nation floor. Now, I like to transition into a topic that is absolutely bothering the Navajo people. And we're seeing it right now. We're seeing it play out in the council chambers with the budget and finance. And the reason why that I continue to talk about this issue is because it needs to be finalized. Because of certain things that are not done is why that we're in this state. I mean, to me, I've been around this government for 40 years. And I tell you what, this is the worst I've ever seen how the Navajo Nation is working. You got subpoenas and the executive branch is saying no. So my question is that specifically addressing the problem between the executive and the legislative branch. No doubt, I view there's a problem, a serious problem. And most of the incumbents and most of the people that are currently running are unaware that that's even a problem. What would you do in this coming term to resolve that?
So, I certainly don't want to wait for the next term to be able to contribute and help resolve the issue at hand. Ako ani tino kudo kwaiki oyo nzildo do general deal nishta. Jashi hut ainde shisizino ya halate kudo as a community, as elected officials. I feel like there's been a certain extent of us being able to try and resolve those. Because if it comes back to like budgetary issues, if it comes back to well, this legislation is actually imbalancing the power of the executive and legislative, you're doing this. Aro tlata e ya o anashado when I'm on the road o yo bansis case khagi lahet ashi kwagi badadi kai do jo hindi nishta do het and I remember when I was out, visiting with communities prior to being elected. And then after I was elected, I've heard a lot of comments like, oh, enjoy your honeymoon stage, enjoy it because you're going to start to disagree with each other. And those were statements that were kind of shared. And I always thought like, okay, so how do we not allow that to happen? And so some of the recommendations that I've given to the speaker, to the president-elect at the time, was how do we maintain consistency with working together? Because it's going to require us as legislators to understand what the executive or even the president's priorities, and then back and forth. Because based batas an tani kliniki khan date khan what aban ce case do priorities in the dat khan dat we have different things, different traits, different skills, and so how do we use that to really produce a lot of good results for our Diné people? Auto speaker when she was elected, bring us together and let's get to know each other as well, because we're going to have to work together. And it's good to find out our strengths so that you assign us to committees where we're the best fit to advocate for our people. As a former classroom teacher, and in my background is primarily in education, I had to beef up my understanding in advocacy and health. But I had to do the same in land and in resources and all these different avenues, because that's expected of us as delegates, is to do a little of everything, kind of like teaching, right? We have different students who have different learning capabilities, different interests, who argue, yes, who decide to get too curious than others, and so you manage it that way. And so that's kind of how I've been moving along in this process and encouraging that still. And it's really become, very unfortunately dismantled, where, we can't seem to be. And oyo kwaeki o do ada. And when we do, I've always encouraged like peacemaking or somebody to help facilitate, to ensure, hey, shosh, ashanti di biniya kwaeki lata sitli, di biniya ashan e san chongi sa doya dat egi no wa. Let's focus on, being able to get to the bottom of some of the concerns that are facing all of us. And so part of that is myself doing the best I can to ask the right questions, to get answers, because it's not just coming from me. When I go out to my chapter meetings and my planning meetings, they ask me, why is it like this? And I've heard that statement before. It's the worst it's ever been. And I really got into the Navajo Nation back in the, early 2010s. I was able to first vote when Shelley and Jim ran as a ticket. But prior to that, in high school was really the only exposure. So I had to really navigate and understand a lot of the scheme of things where, historically how things have been done, and being able to try and be better at those things. So that's something that I'll continue to iterate. It's something that I've said on council floor when it came to, the budgetary concerns from the president's office. I know he has a request for 750,000, but my thing is like, nihitato sinta hajoko nihitalne hashit ao di hune la beson kedo het ashinch or chodes indolate. That's that type of mentality to talk things and to speak and to meet. And that's really some of the messages that I have been sharing amongst my colleagues, to speaker, to president, staff who reach out to me, and to president himself. That's something that it needs to happen. Though from a distance, and having that disconnect and this third party, whatever this is, being able to be a liaison, and we've already come across and have seen that. And so I do my best to stay apprised, but I also do my best to make sure that I'm still giving my energy to my communities as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I really appreciate that that statement. No doubt that the nucleus of this issue is to be able to eventually work together. I've had people say, yes, if I become council delegate, I'm going to walk across the street and shake hands. And you know what? Since the first speaker, the late Nelson Gorman, um, I've worked with all the councils since then. And I've heard that type of recommendation, but it's never worked. There's got to be a piece of the puzzle that's still not done. There's got to be a better way to make this a three-branch government. Which one of the titles do you think needs to be adjusted in order to accomplish that working together?
So for myself, I think in my experience over the last 4 years, Title II does have our structured, but it seems like they're still distinct when they should be succinct. Ako binatishna eya jo e nihebehas ani Title II yahiki Navajo Nation government jo e ajo bakao di executive do judicial do legislative ja o ani thahot abanan nishades nihinde e het a how does it flow together, and how do we make sure that as lawmakers we're meeting the needs and the expectations of maybe not every single one of them, or not to the exact extent, but when we look at the executive side, the expectations like, oh, well, you carry out the law, right? But bitchiko on the executive side, and this is why I always ask Darren Hess, who is here from President's office? President Nagin office stand, Vice President. We need to hear and understand what you all are hearing on that side. Aro priorities so that way we have a mutual understanding to say, oh, if there's a judicial side that needs to come into effect, then how do we do that as well? If there's a way where Title II can start to maneuver those expectations and require those expectations, I think it would allow more fluidity among all three branches, at least in this temporary form of governance. Because right now, what we see is, okay, this is, what the legislation is going to entail. And then it goes across. There's been legislations that have been line item vetoed because they don't meet their expectations. They've been vetoed because it's in creating an imbalance in Title II. They've been vetoed because they don't meet the priorities. Participate in these committees, participate in Nabikiya. You have a seat, your staff can always be here. That way it's a liaison, but how do we also do that through Title II?
Yeah. I mean, like right now, you look at the Navajo Nation Council. It's been very clear. Our observation as the Navajo people out here, we see. And the last thing that's always kind of bothered me a little bit, I know the intent of the Navajo Nation Council. But then what you guys are trying to address is still a problem. And that's what we're talking about here. But the council, instead of having this kind of a diplomatic togetherness, you guys passed a law where you are basically going to force the president to come to council. Isn't that more rather than a working together? That doesn't seem like a reach out. What was your opinion on that legislation?
Oh, so for myself, I think it's first and foremost for any president to come before the people. And with the advancement of technology and social media, they come online. They tell us, they tell me as a delegate, they either at work listening to it or they've missed a meeting, but they go back to it on YouTube or on Facebook. And so I think it's important that any sitting president does come before the Navajo Nation people, where we get to ask questions. Because for myself as a delegate, I have a lot of respect for our chapters, and I work very well with our chapters. And we've been able to, I host regional meetings on the last Tuesday of every month for all 4 of our chapters. Our officials, our staff, our farm board members, Club C veterans, because we're public servants. But out of those comes questions. Out of those comes project deadlines and timelines and advocacy. We have Daltex, we have senior centers, we have other areas that reach the president because your division directors work on behalf of the president. When there's a lack of certain customer service or response or activity, that affects the people, and they deserve an answer. They deserve the president of the Navajo Nation to respond, either hold him or herself accountable, or themselves, or their division directors. And it's once every quarter, so it's 4 times a year. There was an amendment to say, let's do it on Sunday. And then there was others that said, let's do it on, I believe it was spring and winter. And I think it's up to each president. But for myself, I would consider something like that. Should a sitting president also attend agency council meetings? Our officials who work on the ground, who work with their constituents, who hear directly from constituents, have an opportunity to address that to a sitting president. Ako ohotsa go shi alto ajo bohnetsa joe dan go donle khego yo kaho ero danle shin go bejoje jodo ak ero da. But for me, as of right now, when that legislation came before, it wasn't about forcing. It was about ensuring that the president, any sitting president, was able to come before the council. But it's not just on our behalf. For me, as one delegate, it's coming and stemming from our working relationship with our constituents. And I think, unfortunately, this administration has missed a lot of the State of the Nations. Should you have came to the State of the Nations, then I don't think any of these unfortunate new and latest amendments to Title II would have came about. And that's just a personal opinion there.
Do you agree with the office that was established to finalize the final form of our government? Do you think they're accomplishing, and what's your position on that office?
I wish they would hurry up. The reason I say that is because that is, the Navajo Government Development Office, and I've expressed this as well to them. I've expressed it on the floor that, they were established longer than I've been alive. And to come to this point 34 plus years later,
Yep.
And 2 years ago, I pulled funding from them during the comprehensive budget because you have carryovers. When you do carryovers, that means you're not executing what you said you would do. I get it. Maybe you're short-staffed, things happen. But if it's a continuous thing, then you're producing. And I know there's public hearings going out. I know that, there's been some positions that, grassroots organizers and other relatives who have been sharing their positions on it. But for myself, I really wish that it would continue to be a little more aggressive than it has been in the last few years, because I think it's been 30 plus years, and the times have also changed. Demographics have changed. There's over 425,000 registered Navajo citizens. and there's just a lot of changes. And so how does that better assist us in these times?
Okay. Yeah. See, we hope as the Navajo people that the Navajo Nation government, whether it's coming from the president, whether it's coming from the council, but one thing I do know, and this is what I've encountered through the years of working with the Navajo Nation Council. The Navajo Nation Council, some of them have actually defunded the Office of Government Development. Said that, no, we don't want that because they're going to take us out of a job. We're not going to be as effective. We want to continue with that power. So they were intoxicated with power. And I've heard it on first name basis. And so that's why they defunded, because they didn't want to have that. Because inherently right now, because Joe Shirley is a proof. Joe Shirley is a guy that tried to make it a change. So his attempt at was to reduce from 88 to 24 and line item veto. Of course, that didn't work because it just created further conflict, and you got 24 people who are got the same power as 88. So it didn't resolve anything. So I hope that you support, and the rest of the council delegates, is the first thing on their agenda when they walk into that chamber as a member of the 26th Navajo Nation Council, that you guys just say, you know what, let's put everything aside, get this thing done, get over government. Just like you said, I love that statement because you get it. I wish they would hurry. So enough of that. So let me transition on to the second subject, which is kind of well, I shouldn't say kind of. It is exactly what you're doing right now, and that is a member of your standing committee. People call it HESI, you call it HES, so I'm not sure which one to call. And before we get into this, can you clarify with the listeners what kind of doctor are you?
Yeah. Definitely not a medical doctor. I do remind folks that, but I do have an educational doctorate degree.
Okay. So, and it sounds like you're fluent in Navajo, so I don't need to ask that question. So you can go out in the behind the Huskitty and talk to the folks out there as well. So, that's really good. But I want to start off with, I'm just going to get right into this thing because there's a concept that we've been chasing through all these interviews, and we want to get to the bottom of this because it involves Navajo Nation owned businesses, starting with the enterprises, and eventually it's now going to get into the 638 because 638 healthcare hospitals are inherently going to be owned by the Navajo Nation, even though they're localized at different places. So in some cases, they're very successful. I'm talking about both enterprise and the hospitals. And some of them, we don't know what's going on with them. Now, back to the 638s. I have a personal opinion, which I'm very strong on, but I'm not going to say it at this point because I would like to have you, because since you were a member of this, you obviously were given reports at some point. At the base level, do you agree with 638s?
I'm going to answer that in two parts. So, as 638 IHS or 638 healthcare facilities, Joe Kwaet Sahotso Medical Center will Aron Lay Tuba City Tonanis, Tuba City Regional, Aron Lay Naho Konshiko, Ashibi towards the northern portion of our of our nation, Utah healthcare systems. Do A.Agi, Joe A. 638 healthcare. So 638 essentially means that through federal funding, through the IHS, that you kind of separate yourselves from the IHS area office. ananishtat your infrastructure, your HR, your advocacy, it kind of separates and it distincts itself. I cheshtigo a joy saton lay is also the crown point healthcare and lay nanjo da Gallup chinli da lay chinli. Those are IHS facilities. A8 and they go through the IHS area office. For myself, it's everything I think has pros and cons. If you all recall, during the onset of this current federal administration, there was a lot of uncertainties that were granted to federal programs. You had the reduction in force that they RIF, auto hiring fees, freeze, jo IHS do BIE, jo A.agi, auto, you've had a threat to the reduced funding that you receive. Joy Lakin Dalgate do Washington ye hadad zido bez ani Dalia as policies. Some of them went to the Supreme Court. Now, 638s, such as Telto Medical Center, were not severely impacted as IHS was. And Kodo Tsahotsowete, they were able to continue to hire. They were able to continue to function. They put money aside to last them at least 3 years. IHS Chico, they've had concerns, and a lot of them are still rebuilding because IHS almost, and it's probably still on the table to get regionalized. Navajo Nation is the only tribal nation that has its area office because of the magnitude of services and the capabilities that we have here. And so that's why I say I'm supportive of these 638 initiatives. But as a delegate, and I've said this on the floor, I always take a short pause when we give too much autonomy and too much independence. Because when you do, you start to hear HR concerns, embezzlement, unfortunate decision, and those outcomes. And who do they affect? Patients, families, children. Hastuito sani. Dre biniya a kwaeki peso. A ajo betesde do a ajo basenil. Zamne kodo ya hier de Zave indal nishi do bitsine that agi joy ajo they provide the service and make those decisions. And sometimes it's just unfortunate that I don't know where it comes from, but those decisions have tremendous impacts on our patients. And that's my issue when we offer too much autonomy and too much independence. And I get it. We have this with BIE schools. We have this with tribal controlled grant schools as well. They say local control, give us local control, which is good. Yes, have as your community, you know what is fitting for your students. Your demographics are different. Oh, when we give too much of that, you start to hear about boards, misspending. You start to hear about all these different scenarios and situations. Aroti, A, do aro A anana, dabak A, aro A, nepotism, favoritism, that's why I say I support it, but if let's just do it in good faith and in goodwill so that, those that are the recipients of these services truly get those services.
I love it. I love it because, that's exactly the type of mentality. I think in either case, I think the nomination government needs to make a decision whether or not we're going to go all the way or we're going to allow, privatizing these. I guess 638 and the nomination enterprises are both some sort of a privatization through Section 17 in some cases. For healthcare, it's 638. But we have a problem. And I'm glad that you brought this up because this is going to be like a two-part thought because I want to hear what your thoughts, because you've been there. How often does the 638 are they required to report to the Navajo Nation Council?
Not the well, yes, they are. So Salto Medical Center back in 2022 Yanda, they received a 15-year authorization, and in that they present their findings, they present their conditions. Het ashin don nisto het ashin kwaiki don le shla da na heje eshe het their working mechanisms that that's what they present to the Navajo Nation Council. And I could correct myself there if it's just the Health, Education, and Human Services Committee, but in that they also provide annual reports, and so we've start to schedule those annual reports, and they give us information regarding their staffing, their community events, their programming, their infrastructural updates if they have a new facility, health education human services, you have their CEO and others who start to share that information. We read their annual report. So we do that on behalf of a lot of our 638 facilities.
Okay, so when the reason why that we're talking about this is because, in my opinion, the United States have a fiduciary responsibility to fulfill its treaty duties. So, like that happened in 1868. Our Nakahastuya, they agreed. There's a trade-off. We'll go on the reservation. Yes, you'll provide medical care. And so, as time went on, yes, these 638s, in the name of self-determination. But do you think the Navajo people, are we able to run these multi-million-dollar business even twice or three times more expensive than our enterprises?
I cannot confidently say yes. The reason I say that is not to diminish the work that's being done already within our 638, but it reminds me of the Department of the Net Education and how they also talked about a charter model or a 638 model. And my number one question to them was, if it was granted to you today, would you be ready tomorrow? And the response I got was no. And I said, yeah, that's my thought too, is no. So I think until we're prepared for such a maneuver, and we may be, and this is something that needs to be analyzed, are we ready to do that? Are we ready to become our own MCO? Are we able to become our own 51st division, so to speak, as a 51st state like agency to run our own healthcare system? Because should that be the case in the future, there's no turning back. And I think it's important to keep an eye on those possibilities because we know what is best for our communities. They help our people. And we have a lot of bright Navajos out there who are already working in the healthcare field, but many of them are also off Navajo. So are we also able to sustain them should they be here?
Yeah,
and then that
exactly.
goes back to how we go back to other areas. So until we are fully prepared to say, yes, let's do it, because we have an answer for this, we have an organizational chart for this. If this happens, this is the scenario, this is our backup plan, this is our contingency. And how do we, because, we have 13, 14 healthcare facilities on Navajo, but they're all this. And there's got to be some order. And I've brought this to the 638 self-determination. They're comprised of all the CEOs, including San Carlos, and they were chartered under Title 5 of the Navajo Nation Code. They've established themselves, so a lot of their CEOs talk. How do we start to, provide services that, you know, oftentimes we're not saying, oh, you're in that service unit. You go to we have to we're all the net people. We all need services. We all come from the same cloth, and we need this guidance and this help. And that's something that I've shared too with our board here, with our CEO, because I work well with Seattle Medical Center, being that it's within my constituency. Even pharmaceuticals, pharmacy, medication. How do we ensure that we're also being very strategic in the way that those are also being delivered? So I can't confidently say yes because of those reasons until a lot of that is analyzed and discussed, and you know we're ready to take on that significant challenge. And
in your opinion, is there an oversight committee, and how often does the 638 come to report to HESI?
So currently, as the Health Education Human Service Committee, we are the oversight. We in their adopted authorizations, each of them have their own distinct legislation numbers. And in those resolutions, they do provide their annual report. And so sometimes we hear from 2 to 3 in one day out of Sai. They invite us to their facility, they give us a tour, and then they give us their annual report as well. So it does happen on an annual basis. I did have interest at one point. I attended a Tribal Interior Budget Council meeting regarding IHS, the formulation funding. Because in that formulation with IHS, special diabetes, EMS services, you start to prioritize as Navajo Nation. What are some of those priorities? And so I attended several of those convenings, and at one point they were talking about that. You know, who's speaking in Washington for us? Who is going out? Who is really sharing what we see? And in my earlier statement, I shared, you know, I'm not a medical doctor, nor was my background in healthcare, but it's important for me to be educated in those fields because we also need to advocate in state, in regions, in the federal government. And so when I attended this council convening regarding the budget formulation, I had interest to establish an ad hoc committee where those experts, those former clinical doctors, those specialists, we get educated, we receive talking points, and we receive the guidance. And when you go to these convenings, they only want to hear from tribal leaders. And what that typically means is if you're an elected official, that's who they want to hear from. Akonde that's an interest I had, and that's where I learned about this 638 self-determination group that was chartered through Title V of the Navajo Nation Code. And it comprises of all the CEOs, including San Carlos. And so I had interest to formally adopt them too and codify them in Navajo Nation law. But for now, what I did was end up also giving them space during our council sessions to give their written report as well, because they represent all the IHS 638 facilities. So that way it's not just one or two delegates, but it's everyone's constituents.
Yeah. You know, the reason why I think it's very important for us, because, you know, without health, I mean, you know, that's part of the economy, if you will, of any community. If you don't have a healthy community, you don't have a community. And I think that that's where this parallel, because it ultimately affects everybody from the grassroots all the way to the governmental officials. And that's why when they continue to talk about the 638, because here's the problem. Equivalent to the enterprise, the Section 17 enterprises, you know, they operate as an independent to a certain extent. And the 638 is basically the same thing. And looking at it, I don't have to be a doctor. I don't have to be an elected official. But for a healthcare to have, in your words, an annual report, that means only one a year. I don't think that that's enough. That's a problem. And so in the future, whether you continue to serve on HESI or you transition to another, in either case, somewhere along the line, there's going to be legislation. Do we continue to move forward? So that's why I continue to bring it up, because these 638, in my opinion, are just nothing but a runaway train. And the problem starts off with, number one, their board. How many medical doctors are on their boards? There's not even a medical doctor on HESI. So how is the Navajo Nation going to navigate through this lack of medical doctor that's about to do? And so when you get these people, because I was looking at the Winslow Health Board, 80 Bedahasin, and some of these people have been serving in there for over nearly 30 years. And the CEO, I mean, yeah. So the longevity of this, I think the dedication is there, but are they really the experted organization to be able to monitor themselves? Because they don't monitor themselves, they're able to get doctors that have that are getting paid over $500,000. I mean, that's outrageous. Who's monitoring that situation? And then we have a situation here. There's an investigation with 3 Winslow hospital providers, and they've been indicted for medical care fraud, and 3 providers were flagged internally by whistleblowers, and that they were billing people to the tune of $100 million apiece to Medicare. And this is the abuses. Who's monitoring that? That's why I think money is a concern, but why are we paying doctors over $500,000? And if you're reelected, how would you, at least from whether you're on the committee or whether from RDC, that you're going to recommend they need to look at this?
So I think it's important when we look at the reauthorization and those statutes that are outlined in their conditions. Part of that, and the reason I say that is because there are continuous concerns, even with school boards, when it comes to their position, their criterias, when it comes to other areas, right? And so I think it's important for ourselves, especially working with 3 distinct states, to put a level in there, if not already, to help ensure that these mechanisms are being taken care of. And whether those are 15 years, maybe they be reduced to 5 years or 7 years. This is the same issue that I receive with, land that is withdrawn and then they get a permit for 100 years or 99 years. And that's some of the challenges that we see now is, we can't really do much because your expiration's until like 2078 or something. And those create challenges. So I think in a new age where you see problematic concerns come out, you see advantageous behavior, then maybe that's something that needs a little more insight and more oversight from the elected officials. Because by law, that's something that can be certainly initiated into those statutes, and to revisit them so that these forms of behaviors or these forms of unfortunate scenarios and outcomes, either minimize themselves or completely remove themselves, because we shouldn't be targeting our vulnerable populations for profit. And that's an issue that sometimes I come across when I'm working within the realm of doing the best I can to support our alcohol and substance abuse relatives, who need those challenges, but you don't need them to be targeted, and or these non-emergency medical transportations also doing those forms of behavior. So that's certainly something that can be revisited. And based in my experience as a sitting member of Health, Education, and Human Services Committee, I think a lot of our CEOs would be more than willing to help strengthen those conditions that they've outlined in their respective resolutions.
So would you support something like an oversight committee with the established from the Navajo Nation government? Even some people have even suggested, let's have a Navajo Nation Surgeon General rather than going through the Board of Health, because Board of Health, and I don't think that the 638s are even monitoring themselves. Johot oba nate, od net on da hitjak at o hinda til chew. No, not ish. Not need that. So, as long as you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back.
Yes, I would be in support of that, because I know in the past the Department of Health has attempted to hire a clinical director. Heishi kwaiki do jo banan nishiki ayise zein BOA belbahaziniki do yisndal nishto edat egi. So we have, folks who are within the health realm, but not necessarily as surgeons or as medical doctors. It's growing, definitely. I certainly see them out there. They're definitely, going after those degrees and getting those experiences. But
Yeah.
I know that the Department of Health wanted to establish that position, so that they do have somebody who speaks directly and understand those mechanisms. It's the same way that we've experienced a challenge with that during COVID, through the Department of Health, who was trying to enforce reopening procedures for classrooms, but they completely, tried to dismiss teachers. But it's like the teachers are the ones who know their students, who know the atmosphere. A kwaiki the quishin le lan koro ba khaet and lento hit ashi in the kwaiki that hegi a bada hazin. Nihei oh ani, you're from the health field, and the a you're not here. It's kind of like the teacher, vice versa, telling the surgeon, you can't do that. You have to do this. It's a mutual respect to kind of work together in a way where you are complementing what needs to better support our relatives.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to rebut for the whole subject matter on healthcare?
What? I didn't hear your question.
Yeah. Is there anything that you want to, before we go on to the next topic, is there anything you want to rebut about healthcare?
So I know, for myself, again, like I mentioned, I do try to keep myself apprised of all the initiatives that are occurring within the healthcare. I do my best to read material as well as attend the National Indian Health Board conferences, because again, it comes down to not only our facilities, but it's also like special diabetes. It's also food. It's also nutrition. It's also, all these different things that come down to supporting our relatives. And I just do my best to, move in directions that better support them in those ways, especially when a lot of our programming are federally funded.
Yeah.
For example, the Navajo Department of Health, a lot of their programs, about 90% of them are federally funded.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Thank you. Let's go on to the next topic, which is going to be about education. And I want to talk about the 638 schools. You said you were a teacher, so we have some very similar problems. Oversight committee, money coming from the federal grants. We got Johnson O'Malley. I don't know if they're still there, but I know. But there's many. There's also charter schools popping up, and then there's BIE money, and everybody's competing with that school district, and you've got board members meeting over, and so it's almost like they're kind of like another runaway train. Same problem. How would you resolve that?
So, Title 10 earlier, it's something that I've been working on for like 2 years. That's it. The Title 10 ki joit nepabaz on the a Title 10 one, yeah. Ako 2005 yan dan a be latazli. Ako ita do kuje na dina khaido no wuje yikha. Ako shisizino ako ne tabaka aki the counseling aro kodo nihiza chiko to hit ashi yinda altra ero da the funding school boards that agi soja ikone tabaka ako she ya ban sis keso halate soja universally. How do we start to maneuver ourselves to keep ourselves consistent? And what I mean by that is, the superintendent's position, who is operating through the Board of Education currently, any superintendent over the past 20 plus years. If we model it in a way where, is it a director? Is that most fitting? Is it an appointed individual? Is it an elected superintendent? So that there's a level of accountability to stakeholders, right? The Board of Education, I help co-sponsor to reduce it from 11 to 5 so that there's more energy from our elected officials as well as our appointed. Again, this is not to diminish the work of our appointed officials, but it was to make sure that there was a keen responsibility moving forward. I always remind our BIE, our state chartered schools, our school districts, our public schools, our parochial schools, at their administrators. When I advocate, I don't say on behalf of BIE schools, though on behalf of public schools, the Shnida, Le Washington, through our states when I meet with Superintendent Horn or when I meet with Assistant Secretary Wanico from New Mexico. I say on behalf of all schools because the reality is our students and our families are mobile. Tuba City and Shiprock I use as examples. Shiprock, Chico A, they have a charter school, Dream the Net. They have a public school, Shiprock High School. They have a tribally controlled grant school, Shiprock Associated Schools Incorporated. Kao, there's 3 distinct ones. And I get it. Student brings you funding. That's why we all want our enrollment to go high. We start exploring virtual platforms to increase enrollment. I get it. But the underlying important issue is how do we start to advance our students in their comfort, in their interest, what works for them. You know, I even for myself, oho ahandliniki yeho bohosh agi dot e nihizande dot edo English math dot agi hot hot. I can't start to pull educational pedagogical strategies or curriculums that worked and benefited me to today because we have advancement of technology. We have Perithian boards that they use. We have online virtual platforms. So how do we universalize ourselves so that we don't have to distinguish ourselves based on our educational statute as a BIE? Because I remind BIE all the time as well. You're a federal entity and the federal government has a treaty obligation for students. So you
Yes.
also have to be able to partake in this endeavor. And how do we
You
do
know,
that to ensure that our students are all moving in similar directions?
yeah, I really love your word that you just said. It's for the students. Teachers and administrators and boards, whatever. We can talk about all these things, but really, are we defeating the purpose of educating our Navajo students? Because we, just like you mentioned, there's charter, BIE, and the rest. I think there's probably a total of 10 different. You got parochial schools there too. Now, I like that idea of consolidating, but in that right now, it seems like the way that all these schools are all overlapping. You're right; it's all in the name of money, and you know, and it's unfortunate. But we're like doing this on the back of our kids, and we're jeopardizing their education. So, um, again, how do we make that universal happen?
So, when I was explaining the department, or excuse me, the director or the superintendentship, then that will create an organization where it allows everyone's place in that organizational structure. And I know back in 2017, through the U.S. Department of Education granted the Department of Education and the Navajo Nation an opportunity called it's a plan. It escaped me just now, but it's a school improvement plan basically that would allow them to structure their academics and work in a 6-year trajectory where they're able to help their students. And that was to be a model to see if they, are we fit then to become an SEA, a state educational agency like agency as the 51st to be able to oversee all schools. And I know that there's a lot of hesitation out there from school board members, from parents, from administrators, and because certain agencies don't make it easy for that to proceed. By that I mean, there's a lot of distrust from schools and other communities regarding Department of Education, towards the Bureau of Indian Education. If we're truly serious, that model would come into play. And where does everyone fit? Because in Title 10, when it talks about that every student, there's a provision in there that says every student will receive an hour of Navajo language instruction, 60 minutes. But do our schools do that? No. Do our public schools do that? No. Principals, administrators, case. That's also an additional enforcement to make sure that if you're leasing land on Navajo, you abide by Navajo Nation law. And that goes to a lot of our schools as well. But it needs to be a large convening because they're going to have questions, administrators, students, their stakeholders in their education. And we need to meet at a good point where it's okay, let's try it. We agree to here. So how do we do it? Because, there's no way to satisfy everybody. It's just a reality, but we do our best to work together and meet a fine point where either it's something that's we're going to test for a moment, let's try that. And then if it needs to be revisited, let's do that. And we do that in good faith and in goodwill, and there's no issues with that I see.
I like that. Okay, I like that. I think that, we can talk about education forever. But all you listeners out there, welcome to Politics on Navajo Nation podcast. I'm your host, Cal Nez. Our guest tonight is Dr. Andy Nez. He's running for re-election as a council delegate from the Fort Defiance, Sawmill, Red Lake, and Crystal. And so we're talking about several topics, and so far we've covered two. And just a quick question on the next topic, which is going to be about our Navajo ranches. The Navajo Nation, not only ranches, but they bought investment, like one of them being the Washington House. And then we've got also all the ranches, starting with, the most notable one was Big Bow. And then there's all these others. And the latest big one that came into the picture, because somewhere along the line, you as a member of the 25th Navajo Nation Council, these topics have got to come across your table or your desk at some point. But there's a problem. The ranches are owned by the Navajo Nation government, which means that my money and the listeners, as well as yours, our money is being used to purchase these ranches. And everything comes down to money. It's a dream to go buy something, but if you can't afford to run it, if it's in a deficit, which I think, in my opinion, those ranches are a deficit. But even more so, a bigger deal is that our Navajo people can't even use it. But somebody did say last night that there are ranchers that are Navajo, big people, stock owners. I've never heard of them. And so there's a disconnect. What's the purpose of the ranches?
So I know, so you're correct. There's a lot of different ranches, and even in this position, I've learned of several out towards I-40 near I believe it's Holbrook or Winslow. I want to say Holbrook, but I don't know if such a plan that was initiated has been produced. The reason I say that is when we talk about the Wolf Springs Ranch, or when we talk about the available acreage out here just west of Rehoboth. And when we talk about this, is it something that is an investment and then, over time accumulates? Because I believe Wolf Springs generates a small portion of revenue, but I think when you look at the bigger scheme of things, to be able to produce that land, then how do we also use those to our advantage? I say that because we have constituents within our region, near our region, who help to replenish our land when they use or take their cattle off Navajo. Auto, when they do that, the land replenishes itself. When they take them out to these ranches for several years, then they come back. I also was informed about this product called, I believe it was called Navagoat, and it was to help like a goat farm where they would help produce the milk. And so for me as a legislator, to see a business plan, to see the longevity of that business plan, to make sure their statistics and the analysis is there, then that's good for me, because it helps me, okay, my vote is going to be an investment in that. And so when there's certain things that don't make logical sense to me, then I'm going to question those, or I'm going to question the plan to address those, and what's the contingency. Because the adnenigiet beso data ni ado ne beso data a cohajo de ingo ya. It comes with a lot of research and analysis to make sure that these businesses are not just, hey, we need this right away, hey, I met this person and just this person gave me a grand story, so let's do it. That it's a lot larger than that, because we've seen, unfortunately, large scale businesses, ideas not last very long, unfortunately. But in order to sustain that, that's where a lot of this analysis would come into play.
The Washington House.
Without an appraisal, I don't know how that was done.
Well, what would you recommend? What would you recommend as a member of 26 Navajo Nation Council?
You mean for a Washington House?
Washington House.
So I think I'm not sure what the pre and during negotiations were like, or what that period was. What I'm into now is the posts. Having toured the Washington House, it is, the structure is just not feasible. It's not even ADA compliant, where going upstairs or going through the halls is very thin. And typically when you want to when you have wheelchair bound relatives, you need the doors at least 36 feet in length. AA, you have a relative who's maybe wheelchair bound that needs to go in, but this structure is not equipped for that, and that's a first red flag. And the thing that I've learned too is that it was not appraised before the Navajo Nation purchased it. But like for us, I wouldn't purchase a vehicle, or I wouldn't purchase anything without actually seeing it. And that's why I really don't shop online, because I'd rather like see it and feel it, and maybe try it on. But that's something that I've learned was not necessarily the case. I do agree that as a nation, we're the only tribal nation that has a Washington office. I support the Washington office. I support the advocacy that is needed and that has been done over time. And yes, the space, they do need space. They have a space currently that they're renting, but the intent, I believe, was to own it so that you're not spending too much on rent. It's kind of like us, when we rent a house versus, getting a mortgage. So had they just kind of, moved through the process to select a most fitting place, then I think that, I'd be full support of that. Unfortunately, under the 26th council, if I should be reelected, we will probably have to make a decision, if not under this council, whether we sell the property or not. But I know that if we sell it, we're losing its value by about $3 million, and that's the people's money. That's obviously, it unfortunately just went to a facility that was never appraised.
Yeah. All you listeners out there, listen to these candidates. I want you to be looking for their logic process because, how are they going to address these and how much information do they know in their incumbency or even as a candidate? I'm not a candidate, but I know a lot of the stuff. And so our expectation is a little higher for the candidates because we expect them to know majority of this because once they get through Window Rock. So, I appreciate your answers. Sinalisnidniya. Halito sketchinina. Yeah. Now, let's move on to the next topic, and that's going to be economic development. In terms of economic development across the Navajo Nation, how would you really make the Navajo Business Opportunity Act work should you become a member of RDC?
So the Navajo, it's often referred to as NABOA, the Navajo Business Opportunity Act. It was designed to give a lot of credit to our Navajo-owned businesses to make sure that they had a leading role in being able to develop themselves here on Navajo for economic development. And various types of businesses, obviously, they need to get registered, they need their license or their certificate, their conditions as well, to make sure that they're also in good standing for services that they deliver to the Navajo people. And so for myself, when I think about economic development, when I think about the NABOA, it's really about vetting, having the demographics available, because I always refer to Route 12, which extends all the way from Rock Point near Sweetwater, and then coming out here towards Window Rock. And primarily within my region, I always say that, Fort Defiance is the gateway to the nation's capital. Ako laahut kwa eki atingi Route 12 that ningi a laahut khate ako sandal nishton khalshin dal khadat egi ako ya. There's a lot of opportunity that presents itself. But when we go into NABOA and the business opportunity, it's sharing and exchanging ideas when it comes to the demographics, because we understand there's a lot of need out there, there's a lot of suggestions and ideas, but you want it to be one that is a reflection of the community. But you also want an investment or a business that is able to fulfill those. I say that because it's easy for us to say, hey, we want an Olive Garden here, or we want a Walmart here. But for me, economic development and business, you need people. You need to bring our people home, because otherwise you're servicing such a small population that is not going to be enough to sustain or provide the revenue for you to continue operations. Unfortunately, that's something that we saw with Navajo Pine Market in Navajo. Over the course of 5 years, from 2015 on to the early set of 2020, a lot of the revenue was declining. That meant people were not utilizing the laundromat. That meant people were not utilizing the market. And yes, I get it. Things are cheaper in Gallup. Things are cheaper elsewhere. But we have to also invest time and our money. I know sometimes maybe it's a difficult challenge because bread in Gallup is probably $1.29, but here at our local store it's like $3.59. But when you pay for gas and when you're among other amenities, that makes you spend more.
Exactly.
So
oh my gosh.
Yeah, so
Exactly.
let's harbor that here, And when it comes to the business opportunity, we need it vetted. We need them to continuously being vetted because, it's unfortunate that some businesses do take advantage of vulnerable community members that may need a little more guidance and assistance on understanding, what type of services that they're receiving, who those individuals are. Because I've heard it from some business owners too that when they have to replace a water line, for example, or have to redo an electric line, that they have to fix it basically. They take care of it. But what does that mean? That means more funding, more money out of our relatives' pocket. And we're in a time that those types of things shouldn't be happening. So it's really about, again, capitalizing on NAPOA through the vetting process, the certificate, the oversight, the demographics, because I do my best to support small businesses. COVID really smacked me in the face and said, "Hey, stop going to border towns. You have everything you need right around where you live." So that's me personally, my own story. I get it. Others, there's more conveniences, and it's, there's certain times, yes, that you do need to go into town. But for me, I do my best to make sure that I am supporting and doing my best to support small businesses and business owners in general.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Thank you very much because, he just like the next question was going to be, and you already answered it, and that is that, you know, investing in our people. That's going to be the big. That's going to be. You got to keep. You got to keep trying. You can't just say, the laws. People can't just keep saying that we're going to help the small business, but that step by step, and you pretty much basically laid it out. You know, the way that I think that most business owners would totally agree with. Kohoshi Kujidoles, thank you very much for being with us. And I'll give you the next few minutes for you to share your closing comment, Dr. Andy Nez. And you're listening to Politics on the Navajo Nation. This is hosted by Cal Nez, Dr. Nez.
Hakoshi, do iha kodo shiche, aro kwaiki ne, shik e danoslini, slash and kodo did and she, din do koni honasi. Sheetishne kodo currently a delegate, Andy Nez a shije. Arona kodo oge a nishledo tkodachini, bashichin tkachini a dashiche, aro klash shinale, aro kodo di basebatas an kad shinanish is ondo tratnas the niki bigaki, bilnash it south so ne tonils elidobek idalche, a ko di kad as a re election, a nan kodo di na hage nan. That no kodo bini yahiki ya kodo and la ananish so la do jashi an hananish and daz and she shiliate shilin le do shilin john a koko didiki ya na ikiha. Thank you, Shache Cal, and all of our listeners. My name is Andy Nez, and I am running for a re-election to serve our wonderful communities of Fort Defiance, Sawmill, Crystal, and Red Lake, and the greater Navajo Nation. And earlier in the interview, I talked about some areas that are very important for me from the onset, but that I really want to maximize in this next term. Tahegi Eya's recycling initiatives. How do we be better stewards to our land by recycling? We've talked a lot so far about putting out, when you're driving on a road out of for 264 to Burnside, for example, from Windrock to Burnside, how they put turnouts kind of here and there. Aggie, so that people can recycle better, to dispose their trash better. We did secure a grant too for Fort Defiance to do what we called an operation cleanup, where we receive funding to help mobilize trash services and recycling efforts. I'm not the biggest fan of paper Yes, you probably see all my books and stuff in the back, research purposes and things, but it's very important for us to really consider how do we conserve, preserve, and take better care of the resources that we are given. And I'm open to any and all suggestions. Should you want to reach out to me, I'll give my contact at the end of my closing remarks. Second is these community villages. Cal and I had a short discussion about economic development. But for me, you need people. You need development with housing that is not limited to just income based. I get it. Income based serves a significant part in supporting our families, but we also have many families, many students who have just graduated who don't meet those benchmarks. But then they are shunned away, but we need to harbor them in. But these community villages that I'm talking about are important to also provide services to our seniors, our veterans, our early childhood daycares, our vulnerable populations, relatives who are combating, alcohol and substance abuse. And that's the community that we need to create. And we've already been kind of jump starting on a lot of those initiatives and being able to maximize that this coming next term. I'm not waiting for the next term. It's something that we've currently are ongoing, but to see it next term would really be remarkable. The next thing is urban development. We are more than ready to start expanding ourselves to Albuquerque, to Phoenix, because that's where opportunities also lie for us to generate revenue, to generate the taxes, to support an urban, to support Navajos who live in urban spaces. And we can't make their decision to come back home. Let's put some land and some resources out there for you. Vital records, the Net College, conference center, motels. And that's something that we could use assistance from using the Navajo Nation's Land Acquisition Fund. And that's something that I've explored early on in this term. Definitely going to maximize it next term. The next one is preserving our natural resources, conserving our water. We've talked about replacing and upgrading our earthen dams, restoring our water wells, and we're in a significant drought for ages, for years, that we've been in this situation. It's unfortunate to see Red Lake as well. A lot of the water is receding because we don't have moisture. And that's going to be a discipline in ourselves, and how do we protect and maintain our resources? Because I always say someone's going to come knocking on the door wanting the most beautiful natural resources that we have. And it's, we have to be able to do our best to preserve it and to protect it. I get it. There's economic advantages there, but it's also in a way that, we have to consider all options. And if it's something that's not suitable for our land, then that's something that's important for me to consider. Because when you start to disrupt land for those economic gains, sometimes you do get health disparities, health issues, and those are impacting long term. And that's something that I always consider when these issues come up. And then the last thing that I want to share, and there's a lot more, but amending Title 10. I've been doing it for about 2 years now with the help of our school boards, our stakeholders, Department of Dene Education, and others who continue to share their recommendations. And so that's something, again, to advance. A lot of, there's just a whole lot that we're doing, and I want to be able to continue that. Because as an elected official, I always say you don't need to be an elected official to make change, but I know to enact laws that support our people, that's the support that you need, is to be an elected official to make sure that those laws are enacted. And so specifically with our community, I'm going to use the last couple minutes here to talk about Fort Defiance, Sawmill, Crystal, and Red Lake. I work very well with each of our chapters. I have about a 98% attendance rate for their chapter meetings and their planning meetings. Actually, I don't even think I've missed any planning meetings from Fort Defiance. I could be wrong, but it's definitely less than 3 or 4 from each of them. So I do a fairly good job. And that's where you hear a lot of these concerns that help lead and push these initiatives. We've also been able to maximize our efforts with congressional directed spending. currently, as of today, June 10th, U.S. Senator Arizona Kelly Gallego pushed 2 projects for us, one for Sawmill, which is the Intergenerational Learning Center, one for the N9073 Blue Canyon Road, and advanced that to committee. So we're very hopeful that that goes through all committees and signed into law. On the New Mexico side, because all of my regions share both New Mexico and Arizona, Red Lake, Donle, in 321 roadway, the hydraulic and hydrologic study, and for Red Lake, the new chapter complex have also been supported by Congresswoman Ledger Fernandez and New Mexico Senator Ben Ray Lujan. For me, that's important that we're maximizing our communities at all different levels because that support is needed, because we invest into federal programs, state programs, tribal programs. So they have also a responsibility to support us. And I'm glad that these are moving quite along. And we continue to work one-on-one. The Triple R projects, the ARPA projects. For me as a delegate, we did receive regional funds. So Section 10 of the regional projects that I received, I've closed out almost about 90% of it now. And on the Section 11 funds that we received, I'm about 99% closed out. So we work very closely with all of our agents, executive, on the legislative side, on the judicial side, to address a lot of the concerns that we hear at the community level. And, we maximize that to make sure that the longevity is there to support our future as well. So we're almost at the top of the hour. And if anyone has any questions, suggestions, you can also follow our Facebook as my name, Dr. Andy NEZ, Council Delegate for Fort Defiance, Sawmill, Crystal, and Red Lake. I did post a lot of our information regarding some of our upcoming stops at each of our chapters. You can also visit our website at community.net. That's KEMMUNITY.net, where we share a lot of our reports and updates and our bulletin that kind of outlines some of the local community events. And my legislative district assistant does her best to keep them updated. So sometimes if things are not as updated, just give it a few days. We try to, among all the things that we're doing, we try to stay in touch with that as well. So again, a lot of things that we've accomplished, not only in our chapters, but regionally, tribal, state, and federal. At the federal level, there's a lot of accomplishments, and I'm very proud of myself and our team for continuing to put their best foot forward to support and do the best that we can in this position. And so we appreciate the support. We appreciate the kind words that everyone has, and any recommendations, suggestions. We're here to grow as well. We're to do our best. So so na ni hidini do le ado also ade do anjonoshi do ado le do miskando no which she have a good safe rest of the evening and the days ahead. So nana do le.
Agushila, there you go. Thank you for listening, everybody. We had Dr. Andy NEZ. He's an incumbent for his council chapter areas. And I want to thank him again. There's not very much I can add to that, to your interview. Very, very nicely done. So, Joshi Achinda do Tliko Yoshina da Hino Sato Letico. I had Lana, Corona, a going at Shiro Lake.
Akoshi
Agona.